Good evening and welcome to the Deal Center's Virtual Learning Series. I am Cheryl Cooper-Smith, the kindergarten through third grade professional development specialist here at the Deal Center. Our mission is to improve the early language and literacy skills of Georgia's children by providing research-based professional development for organizations working with children from birth through to age 8. To achieve this mission, we have designed our learning series to take you on a science of reading journey with literacy experts from around the country. Throughout this year, we will take you on an in-depth look at reading foundations by exploring the topics on oral language development, the phonological processing system, orthography, morphology, fluency, comprehension, and reading difficulties. Our goal is to share how science has proven the brain learns to read and to provide you with methods, strategies, and resources that translate scientific theory into evidence-based practice. Our vision is to enhance educator knowledge and improve classroom instruction to propel every Georgia's child to read proficiently and beyond. So just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Our team will monitor the chat box. Please feel free to type questions or comments in the chat. We will hold questions for the presenter until the end of the session for discussion during the Q&A. Any technical questions for the team we will respond to directly in the chat box. Each learning session is recorded. Please visit the Deal Center website to access the videos of our virtual learning sessions. Click the Resource tab on the website to open the page to the menu that is marked Virtual Learning Series. You will find we have 2 video collection sets full of great information. Now, Garrett, tell us some information about the CEU credit.
Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, everybody. My name is Garrett, and I'm the data analyst at the Deal Center. The Deal Center now offers continuing education units for attending our professional learning events. All attendees are eligible for CEU credit. However, there are a couple of conditions that must be met in order to receive these credits. To receive CEU credit, you must attend at least 60% of our session, and a survey must be completed and submitted to us within 1 week of today's event. More information will be provided after the learning session, so please stay tuned until the end.
Okay. So, folks, I want you to mark your calendars because you are invited to join the Deal Center for the 2021 Virtual Governors Summit on Early Language and Literacy. Literacy changes lives. This day-long event takes place on June 16th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. This year's summit will focus on advocating for literacy equity for every child in your community and state. During the summit, we will explore the impact of cross-sector collaboration, the implementation of evidence-based practices aligned with the science of reading, and the alignment of organizations and systems on improving early language and literacy for children from birth to age 8. The summit will provide insight on operationalizing ideas to practice and equip participants to return to their communities with practical, innovative solutions for improving literacy equity. This year, we are not able to come together in person, but we hope you will join us virtually to advocate for equitable access to resources, opportunities, and high-quality education that advances literacy achievement for all Georgia's children. Now, I am going to give you an opportunity to see a little of the synergy and spirit around this great event. Hopefully, it will inspire you.
The vision of the Deal Center is propelling every Georgia child to read proficiently and beyond.
We have a huge responsibility as a community for our children. We are not just parents and teachers and educators, administrators and policymakers, but we are brain architects. We are architecturing the brains of children right before their very eyes.
We don't always go around saying we're working on literacy, but everything we do is grounded in the expectation that we're literate and that our kids are always developing their literacy.
We will talk with our babies. We will continue to follow the science in infant, toddler through pre-K. We will measure and act upon what matters from kindergarten to third grade.
Okay, now, online registration will open soon. So be sure to be on the lookout for announcements that will come to you through your email, and information will also be posted on our website and social media handles. Okay, so now I'm so excited that I would like to pose a question for you all before we begin our event tonight. What is reading fluency? To help us clearly define and develop a deeper understanding of this essential skill, it is my honor to introduce our featured speaker, who will guide our learning and share her expertise for this evening's session, Dr. Jan Hasbrouck. Dr. Hasbrouck is a leading researcher, educational consultant, and author who works with schools in the United States and internationally. Dr. Hasbrouck worked as a reading specialist and coach for 15 years and later became a professor. She is the author and co-author of several books, and her research in reading fluency, academic assessment, and interventions, along with instructional coaching, have widely been published. She continues to collaborate with researchers on projects related to reading, assessment, and intervention, and enjoys volunteering at her grandson's kindergarten through 8 school in Seattle. Without further delay, I am excited to welcome Dr. Jan Hasbrouck. Dr. Hasbrouck, I am going to stop sharing, and please get ready to share your presentation.
Okay, Cheryl, I will do that. And lovely to be here tonight, everyone. This is very exciting to me to be one small part of the work that you are doing at the Deal Center, what the Deal Center is doing, and the work that all of you are doing out in your schools and classrooms with the families that you work with. So I'm very happy to be here to talk about this this one aspect of skillful reading that clearly you are focused on. You're giving up some of your time this evening after what I assume was probably a very busy day to talk about reading fluency. So my hope is that I help you deepen and confirm understandings that you already have, maybe add a little bit of new knowledge, some new resources or ideas for you. I also know that the time we have together here is limited. So I don't know if any of you connect with other educators on Twitter, but I've started doing that.
Yeah. Reggie, what? Me and him work together at Horse. Okay. Okay, Reggie Battle. Okay, so you gonna answer it.
Okay. If you are so inclined, I'd love to connect with you on Twitter. My Twitter feed, I guess is the term that's used, is only around instruction and primarily around reading. So I have found it to be a really profitable and beneficial for me, profitable in terms of my professional learning and connections with people. So that's another way we can continue to connect. So tonight we're going to talk about reading fluency, understanding what it is, how to assess it correctly and accurately, and to give us good information. And then, of course, talking about how we can help develop reading fluency as a skill. So I'm going to be pulling some of the information I'm sharing with you tonight from this book that I had the honor and real pleasure of creating with Dr. Deb Glaser, whose name you might know. She is one of the original letters trainers from working with Dr. Louisa Moats. Deb Glaser also has created a set of training tools, professional development tools called the Top 10 Tools for Teachers of Reading. She's done all kinds of work in her career, and she very graciously agreed to work with me to write a book on reading fluency. So tonight, if what I'm saying here today intrigues you, you want to know a little bit more, go a little bit deeper, this is one opportunity for you. Deb and I were also asked by the International Literacy Association to write a short brief that they called it on reading fluency, and we titled that one, Reading Fluently Does Not Mean Reading Fast. This is available for free at the website shown here. I was also recently,
Dr. Hasbrouck, we're not able to see your PowerPoint yet.
You're not seeing my PowerPoint?
Yes, it's not sharing for us.
Okay, well then let's leave this and start again.
I thought you were just having a brief conversation with us for a minute.
Thank you for
now we can see.
Okay. All right, I must have skipped a button somewhere, which happens. Lots of moving pieces. Do we see it now?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. All is good.
This is a picture of the book, and before I had this slide up that does have the little Twitter icon there, at Jan Hasbrouck is the way to connect with me on Twitter. This is a picture of the book and a list of the chapters from the book that Deb Glaser and I wrote called Reading Fluency, and this is where I'm going to pull some of my conversation, our topics for tonight. The ILA brief with this pretty cover is available at this website at ILA Worldwide Resources. And recently I was asked by the folks at the Reading League to write a chapter in their special edition of their Reading League journal. They did a special issue devoted to updating the information from the National Reading Panel report that is now this year, or last year actually, 20 years old. And they asked me to write an update on the fluency chapter for that. So that's another way to follow up on the work that I have done. But let's go ahead and launch into the topic of reading fluency tonight, and starting with talking about what it is, talking about understanding reading fluency. And in our book, Deb Glazer and I talked about the fact that when we're talking about reading, we are talking about something that is highly complex. In that little video clip that Cheryl showed about the upcoming conference, somebody was talking about teachers are changing the architecture of the brain. That's a really interesting way of talking about it. I've heard other people talk about teachers are like brain surgeons. We're changing how the brain functions. And this aspect about what our amazing brains do called reading is really unbelievably complex. It is a highly complex task that involves many interconnected and codependent linguistic processes. And each of those draw upon a variety of separate skills. So that's quite a sentence there. And I'm really grateful to have this image to represent the complexity of reading. And that's what this is. This is not a picture of the brain. It is a statistical map, if you will, created by researchers who did a multivariate analysis of the theoretical aspects of reading based on the evidence that we've gleaned about what reading is. And essentially what this is demonstrating, the little circles are some of those individual complex linguistic skills, and the lines are the processes that connect them. The numbers there that you don't need to memorize, there's no quiz involved here. They're simply the statistical weight or contribution of that component to the ultimate outcome. So if you look to the left, you see two circles, one of which at the top is the visual coding that is necessary for reading if you're reading with your eyes. So this would be different if we're talking about children who are blind. But for most of us, we use a visual coding process. The circle at the bottom left there is the phonological. That's the auditory processing of the language. And then we move through visual analysis, phonological analysis, the semantic and syntactic linguistic analysis, the spelling, the decoding, that takes us eventually to the far right, where it all ends up with reading comprehension. That's the outcome that we want from all of these complex linguistic processes. We want to end up with skillful comprehension. So because reading is so complex, it's hard to talk about, it's hard to think about. So I think we can all be very grateful to Goff and Tunmer, who back in 1986 proposed that we could think about reading in a more simple way. Not to think about reading as being simple, but think about how we view reading in a more simple way. And they proposed this this equation, if you will, that this end goal that we have for all reading, which is reading comprehension, is the outcome of language comprehension, or the ability to understand spoken language, times the ability to decode, or the ability to both decode, figure out new words, and recognize familiar words. And it is the product of these two things. You have to have both. They interact in that complex way. But if we get it right, the outcome is reading comprehension. So what they're suggesting is this is what reading is. There's very little disagreement that this is essentially, there might be some disagreement about how the processes connect and the weight and the direction of that, but most certainly researchers would agree that this is a representation of reading. All that Goff and Tumner are saying in their simple view of reading is that we can look at this in a simple way, understanding that reading comprehension is our goal, but we need to have both the decoding aspect and the language comprehension. Some people refer to that as linguistic comprehension in order to have that reading comprehension. And I would assume that at least some of you are familiar with this infographic that was created by Dr. Hollis Scarborough back in 2001, referred to now in the reading community as Scarborough's rope. And what she has essentially done is create a beautiful, in my mind, beautifully accurate and representative image for what reading is. If we look at that tightly woven rope there at the end, we could label that reading comprehension, following Goff and Tumner's model. She labels that tightly woven rope the goal of reading, skilled reading. That's where we want to get all of our students to this place where they are fluently executing and coordinating all of those component pieces. That's the goal of reading. To get there, we have to go back to the beginning, just like in the simple view of reading or the more complex view of reading. We have to look at language comprehension, and what Scarborough did is break down, taking away that veil, if you will, from the simple view, and uncovering what those language comprehension or linguistic comprehension components are. We have all this stuff that needs to be in place, plus the second strand of the rope, the second major strand of the rope is word recognition, where we need that phonological awareness, the ability to decode, and ultimately the ability to recognize words by sight. So using that understanding of reading, we can now have a conversation about reading fluency, but even that's not simple. There are many questions that surround the definition of fluency as a concept, as a construct. So we're going to try to answer some of those questions. There are still questions, but let's look at defining fluency. And I want to start with this video of this.
The magnet and the picture would just fall to the floor. Why don't they stay up? They don't stay up because most walls do not have iron in them. What do magnets do? Many people have pictures on a door of their...
Okay, I'm going to stop it there because what I show that video for is just a little bit of a teaser, because this is not a demonstration of fluent reading. I would not call this fluent reading. I don't think most researchers or experts would call this fluent reading. I would label what he's reading very fast. This is a demonstration of fast reading, which is not necessarily fluent reading. So that's just a little teaser for the conversation we're going to have. Back in the year 2000, when the National Reading Panel report first was published, this is where, for many of us, the discussion around fluency really began, because they were one of the first professional groups that really drew our attention to fluency. They talked about in the chapter on reading fluency that fluency was very important, essential for comprehension, and back in 2000, they said it was being widely ignored in classroom practice. So that really got the attention of a lot of us in the reading field. And back then, they defined reading fluency as the ability to read a text quickly, accurately, and with proper expression. And they went on in the chapter to say that fluency depends upon well-developed word recognition skills, what we would call sight words, but such skills do not inevitably lead to fluency. You can't become a fluent reader by just memorizing a lot of words. It's certainly much more complex than that. Nowadays, we have a more nuanced understanding of reading fluency, helped along by researchers such as Marianne Wolf and her colleagues, that remind us that reading fluency is not just about reading text or reading passages, that we need to be thinking about fluency as it develops, that we can be thinking of fluency, and we should be thinking of fluency as developing in progressions over time, that in order to ultimately be able to read like that little boy did in that video, a lot of things have to happen first. And there is an order, there is a progression, and we know that progression starts with accuracy, then automaticity. So we first need to learn what the letters are, what those letter patterns are. We need to learn the accuracy of reading at the word level, and then connected text that brings in the semantic and syntactic processes at the connected text level. We start with accuracy, then move to automaticity at these component levels, and then we hope, fingers crossed, you can imagine that tightly woven rope. Then we want to help every student get to that point where they can fluently and effortlessly read text. And the purpose of all of that is so that their attention can be fully allocated to the comprehension. So tonight we're spending this whole time talking about fluency, but the reason we're talking about fluency is because of comprehension. If it's helpful for you, it's been very helpful for me, that image from Scarborough's rope, that tightly woven rope that contains all those strands, but the strands they're all present. They've been learned, and they've been over time tightly woven to that place. So when we talk about tonight, whenever I say the word fluency, if it's helpful for you, you could imagine that tightly woven rope. That's where we want to get all of our students when we're talking about text reading fluency. And remember, Scarborough labeled that part of the rope as skillful reading that includes comprehension. That's why we're having this conversation tonight about fluency. It's because of its connection to comprehension. As the National Reading Panel said, fluency is necessary for comprehension. It's not sufficient by itself for comprehension. So we do know in that progression, that development of fluency, that the ability to read automatically should only become an instructional priority after students become accurate readers. That has to happen first. Those non-automatic readers should not be encouraged to just read faster and faster. And this might be a different way of thinking about fluency for you. And remember, toward the end of my presentation, I am leaving time to answer some of your questions. So if you want to jot down things that seem confusing or surprising to you, you can put them in the chat now. And Cheryl will share those with me later, or you can jot them down and we'll deal with those later. But just a reminder that is coming. So when we're talking about ultimately reading fluency in text, the definition that Deb and I wrote about in our book have these component pieces that we're talking about: the ability to read words with reasonable accuracy at an appropriate rate with suitable expression. And those three component pieces are usually involved in any definition of fluency. They were in a slightly different order, but they were in the National Reading Panel definition. And most, if you go to any website or book and they talk about reading fluency, they're going to talk about accuracy, rate, and expression. Sometimes they use the word prosody, but those are part of everybody's definition of fluency. Deb and I went on one more step and said, really, we also need to think about how fluency leads us to accurate and deep comprehension and motivation, because that's the whole purpose. If we just talk about accurate reading, rate, and expression, that doesn't, outside of any context, doesn't have any meaning. So we added comprehension and motivation there. We also decided that it would be important because of our knowledge of reading science and the many, many decades of clinical practice with actual children that we have, that we knew that the performance standards for these three components should vary depending on why we're doing the task. What kind of reading are we doing? What is the situation that we're reading? So the performance standards for accuracy, rate, and expression, we use these terms: reasonably accurate reading, at an appropriate rate and with suitable expression. But because those performance standards are variable, I want to take some time to define them for you, what we mean. So you can be clear about this when you're working with your own students or your own children. So what do we mean by reasonably accurate? Well, first of all, I want to point out that this is the first thing in the first component in our definition. Unlike the National Reading Panel that said fluency first is the ability to read quickly, we put accuracy first, and we want to really underscore reasonable accuracy and have it stuck in your brain by using just a few F words here with exclamation marks, nothing you need to be concerned about. The words I'm going to use here to talk about reasonably accurate, the first word is the word first. When we think back about Wolf's statements about fluency developing in progressions, and the work of Jean Shaw and others that said accuracy has to be the first thing we pay attention to at the letter level, the letter sound level, the word level, the phrase level. It's accuracy first. And when those of you who work with preschool children, kindergarten children, it's really accuracy first of all those component pieces that we really need to be attending to. The second F is foremost of the three components of fluency. When we're thinking about that outcome, which is what we should think about all the time, that outcome of comprehension, accuracy is the most important. It's not just equally, it's not equal to some of the other aspects of fluency. It's of foremost importance if we care about comprehension, which we always should. Otherwise, why are we even talking about reading? So reasonably accurate, first, foremost, and forever. It's not just our preschoolers and kindergartners or first graders that we should be thinking about accuracy. Accuracy, reasonable accuracy, and we'll get to that, but it is throughout our reading career is what we need to in order to have fluence. So first, foremost, and forever, accuracy is the foundation of fluency. So those are those 5 F's that we talk about in accuracy. First, foremost, forever. Accuracy is the foundation of fluency. We need to be thinking about that first. But let's go to that performance standard now of reasonably accurate. If you're thinking about teaching children to read words, to read phrases, to read sentences, and I'm working with them in a teaching situation where I might have one child with me or a small group of children with me, I want their accuracy to be in those situations 100%, because this is a teaching opportunity. If they read a word incorrectly, I'm going to correct them, help them figure out how to read that word and why they made the mistake. But now we're talking about children reading out on their own or adults reading on their own. When folks are reading on their own, what is the level of accuracy that is reasonable to consider for independent reading from the researchers if we're concerned about comprehension? And the answer might surprise you a little bit because it's 95%. And that actually might seem really high. We've all been through school ourselves, college, university. When I was a college professor, if a student could obtain 95% in what I've graded, 90% would be an A. 90% should be fine, we would think. So why do we hold 95% as a reasonable standard for comprehension? Well, I wanted to have a way of exploring that a little bit. So I asked a former student of mine whose husband is a physician to give me a piece of text, short, only has 61 words in it, a short piece of text that might have words that were difficult either to figure out or words that we didn't understand, even though we are, I would assume most of us here, skillful readers. So I'm going to ask you to I'm just going to give you a few seconds to do this. Will not take a long time, but I'm going to show you a piece of text, and I'd like you to try to read it and see if how well you do. for comprehension of this piece of text. Here we go. Okay, we don't want to spend too much time on that. And I'm just going to assume, unless some of you have a physician background, that you at least stumbled over these words. I would also guess that a lot of you, if not most of you, could probably use your decoding skills, your skills of multisyllabic rules, some knowledge of morphological analysis. You could probably decode these words, but perhaps not understand them. But I only marked 5 words out of 61, which would put this at about 92%, pretty close to 95% accuracy or word identification. If we use the acronyms there, the QT, et cetera, that puts this at 87% accuracy for most of us. The translation of this, thanks to my former student's husband, Chris Noyes, this table may not include all of the medicines that cause heart problems. The risk of heart problems may be increased in women, the elderly, and those with low potassium, low magnesium, slow heart rate, starvation, kidney failure, and brain injuries, etc. But this always makes me wonder why physicians can't just speak English like the rest of us. But the point being here is that you do not have to fall much below 95%. And you cannot understand what you're reading at all. Accuracy is first, foremost, and forever extremely important as the foundation of fluency, because that's what opens the door for us for comprehension. So let's talk about emerging readers, those children at kindergarten, early first grade, who are just starting to put together all these pieces. They're way back over on Scarborough's rope. What should their accuracy levels be when they're reading independently? Should it be a little lower? Because they're just beginning. They're going to make a lot of mistakes. Maybe 95 is the number for everybody. Actually, the research says for our emerging readers that independent reading should be really easy for them. That's the message of these numbers here. We should, in the early, and we can call it vulnerable, developing stages of reading, we should only be asking those children to read what we would essentially call easy text. Making sure so we control what they're reading. We give them decodable text that they've already pre-learned the words. We give them words with lots of scaffolding and support so that they have confidence in what they're doing, but they also don't spend time reading words incorrectly and orthographically mapping letter strands incorrectly in their brain. That making corrections is very hard to do. And we know that this accuracy depends greatly. Ultimately, the accuracy of text reading depends on that sight word reading, as the National Reading Panel talked about too. So let's spend a minute talking about that, what sight words are, because we have different ways of talking about it. We teachers have a common usage of the term sight words, but there is a far more accurate definition that's grounded in research. And I would just, I don't want to say anybody's wrong here, but if we use the more research grounded definition of sight words, I think it helps us in our classroom practice do engage in activities with our students that are going to ultimately be more helpful to them. So in common usage, most teachers talk about sight words as being those words that are spelled using at least one irregular pattern, a phoneme graphing pattern, words like one or have or was or of. We talk about those are the kinds of words that have to be learned by sight because we can't sound them out. We can't decode them using the strategies that work for most words. So that these words must be learned by looking at the whole word and memorized as a whole. The problem with that is that that implies that we learn words as a memorized whole. And we used to believe that. That was theoretically, we didn't actually know what was going on inside the brain very much. So we did a lot of guessing about how the brain was becoming a reading brain. Now that we have all kinds of research tools, including magnetic encephalography and functional magnetic images of actually functioning brains, we now know, we've known for a couple of decades, that we do not learn words as sights. We don't store sight words in the same area of the brain, which is over here, that we store images. They're stored where we store language, and they are memorized in a different way. So what researchers would say a sight word is any word that has been previously learned by the reader that can be instantaneously recognized, even precognitively recognized by a reader. And I'm actually this is important enough that I'm going to talk more about it later in my talk tonight. But so summarizing accuracy, what do we mean by reasonably accurate? It's reasonable for the task. That's why we use this term. Most of the time, we have to be able to read with at least 95% accuracy in order to comprehend, most of the time. But it also might be reasonably reasonable to read with much less accuracy. We're really trying to read something new. We're going to make some mistakes, but we want to try to read it anyway. As an adult reader, that would be fine. We're reading for fun. We're reading for entertainment. We're skimming through the newspaper on a Sunday morning. We're reading a magazine we picked up at the grocery store just for fun. Accuracy then doesn't matter as much. And it may be sometimes when we want to strive for 100% accuracy. We're reading something very important. We're reading we talked about in the book of reading the directions on a bottle of prescription medicine. We want to try at least for 100% accuracy. And we as human beings are rarely 100% accurate, but we can try for that sometime. But most of the time for comprehension, around 95% would be reasonable. The second component in our definition is appropriate rate. And if we just believed what we saw in classrooms or watched that little boy reading, or the National Reading Panel implied that fluent reading is reading super fast, as quickly as possible. We know better now. I think this statement by our late friend, a Georgian himself, Steve Stahl, and Melanie Kuhn wrote this in 2002, this brilliant statement that fluent reading should sound like speech. It just makes so much sense that because what we're trying to do, of course, is comprehension, and fluent reading needs to support our understanding of what's being read. And our brains are not yet evolved to make sense of speech or print without a whole lot of assistance. And if information that we're reading comes into the brain too quickly, the brain can be overwhelmed. If it comes in too slowly, it cannot be processed by the brain. Our brains are wired, if you will, through evolution, heredity, all kinds of things, to make sense of information that matches speech. Reading is mapped onto speech. So keeping that reading in a range of speed, rate, that matches not too fast and not too slow enhances comprehension, and we would call that appropriate. but it's helpful to have numbers around that, some to quantify what we mean by appropriate rate. So my colleague, Jerry Tyndall, and I have done a series of studies creating norms for oral reading fluency. We're going to talk about ORF a little bit later, ORF standing for a particular assessment of oral reading fluency. Our most recent study resulted in this chart where we measured the ability of students to read unpracticed grade level text out loud for 1 minute, and then we scored those their reading using a particular scoring, standardized way of scoring, and then created these percentile norms. And we saw that children, when we score their percentiles and rank their percentiles, that there are children who read very fast, there are children who read very slow across all the grades, fall, winter, and spring, and there are children who read right about in the middle. And this represents over the scores from over 6 million children from who read all kinds of different passages. So it's a fairly robust, researchers would say, a very trustworthy set of information. But when we look at that chart and talk about appropriate rate, it may surprise you, it may not, but the recommendation based on research for which percentile should we be aiming for is actually the 50th percentile. And I think that does surprise a lot of people because we all know the 50th percentile is average. And where would we want to strive to have our kids all be in the average range? But the reason we do this is based on research evidence. Number one is that clearly, you can look at our chart and see there are children, there are sometimes quite a few children who read above the 50th percentile. However, we just don't have evidence that those children who read faster are also reading better. And that's what we want. Reading better means they understand what they've read. So yes, we've got kids, we've documented, we've got kids who read fast, but there's just not evidence from the research that suggests that those kids are significantly, that their comprehension is assisted by that fast reading. And in fact, all of you who work in classrooms, work with children who do speed read, that speed reading faster than the 50th percentile can be detrimental to comprehension. And on the other hand, we do have significant evidence that those children reading below the 50th percentile do almost always have some level of difficulty with comprehension and often motivation as well. If you have to read slowly, it's just really hard to be motivated by your reader. So we recommend the 50th percentile. This chart reduces all those numbers on that other chart to the 50th percentile. And at the bottom, we've given some guidance for how to interpret those scores, because there's a range around each of these scores. It's not just exactly the 50th percentile, but anything at the 50th percentile up to 10 or more above, down to 4 words correct below that 50th percentile, that student should be just fine. The yellow zone, caution, if a student's score for their grade level, fall, winter, or spring, beginning, middle, and end of year is from 5 to 10 words below the 50th percentile, we really don't know. That's kind of a gray area. We called it the yellow zone. We have to be cautious about those children. But any student given a grade level passage and they read that more than 10 words below the 50th percentile, that is a red flag that something is going on with that student, and we should do then some diagnostic assessments to figure out why they are not able to fluently read grade level text. And we took that even further with this chart that takes the end of year score, and we manipulated those scores a little bit. We put them up a little bit or down a little bit just to make a nice, easy to remember score based on our 2 studies, 2017 and the previous one in 2006. So End of grade 1, about 60 words correct per minute, 100 for grade 2. And you can see in grade 5 and 6 and beyond, although many people do read faster than 150 words correct per minute, they can read faster than 150 words correct per minute. That seems to be fine in terms of access to comprehension. So when we talk about rate, appropriate rate, we want it appropriate to support comprehension. We want it to mirror speech as much as possible, neither too fast nor too slow. Most of the time, if comprehension is important, if it may be appropriate to read much more slowly sometimes. Again, you're reading something new for the first time. It's full of difficult or new words. If you were, I would assume that most of you did not read that text from the physician's handbook. You didn't read that at 150 words correct per minute. It was appropriate to slow down. And sometimes it's appropriate to read faster. We're just reading again for fun, for pleasure. It doesn't matter. We can afford to read a little faster. So the last component is the expression. And we're talking about suitable expression. Expression being the pitch, the tone, the volume, the emphasis, the rhythm of our speech. And we can go back to Steve Stahl and Melanie Kuhn. Suitable expression should help us make our reading sound like speech. Let's make that connection again to comprehension. That's why we care about it. Suitable expression should mirror speech because our brains are wired to make sense of spoken language. So suitable expression typically mirrors spoken language and conveys meaning. But the newest research in this area where they specifically look at expression, that component of fluency, there's a lot of consensus around that expression or prosody is an outcome of comprehension rather than something we should spend a lot of time teaching because it contributes to comprehension. It's really hard to figure out how to emphasize a word or what tone to use if we don't understand the meaning of the sentence. A good example of that is my colleague and friend, Tim Rosinski, who's written a lot about reading fluency. And he showed us by simply changing the emphasis on a single word, you can change the whole meaning of a sentence. Robert borrowed my new bicycle, not Raymond. Robert borrowed my new bicycle. He didn't steal it. Robert borrowed my new bicycle, no one else's. Robert borrowed my new bicycle, not my old bicycle. Robert borrowed my new bicycle, not my new book. So in order to put that emphasis, a reader would have to know the meaning before correctly or using suitable expression with that. So in our fluency book, as we wrote it and went along, we occasionally put some quick responses in there for some reflection. So we're not going to spend time on this together, but just for your thinking about, based on our discussion here, how should a teacher be thinking about accuracy and rate when working with students in kindergarten and early first grade? And I hope I've given you some things to think about in that regard, thinking about those progressions, and then how this changes for older students. Complex stuff that we're talking about in reading fluency. So when we talk about these three components of reading, we're not done there when we're talking about fluency because there's all this other stuff going on in the background. It's not just those components. It's also what Deb and I call the mechanics, the word decoding skills, text reading, and all of the comprehension skills that need to be in place for our students, fluent readers. So this is just a reminder that we're talking about something that is really complex. And again, let's emphasize why we're talking about reading fluency. Some people have talked about Jack Pakulski and David Chard talked about fluency as being a bridge between the early skills of reading, being able to just identify the words, and ultimately understanding, being able to construct meaning, to glean new vocabulary and comprehension, pull that all together. It's fluency that connects those two components. In our book, Deb and I used a different analogy. I like the bridge analogy, and we included that in our book too, but we also talked about fluency as being a door that's closed if you're not reading with sufficient fluency. When you reach sufficient fluency, the door opens. And that's why we really talk about it. It opens when you're sufficiently there. It doesn't open fast, bigger. And there's no advantage to a bigger, wider doorway for reading faster and faster and faster. The door is closed or the door is open with reasonable accuracy and appropriate rate, and that suitable expression. So why do we talk about fluency? The accuracy piece is important because we've just experienced comprehension is limited by inaccurate reading. Doesn't have to be far below 95%. Comprehension is limited if we're reading either too slowly and laboriously or reading too fast. And then I am sure that the reason many of you are here this evening and taking a chunk of time from your overly full days is that you've seen this in your classrooms or with your own children, this very sad equation here that our students who lack fluency almost always lack motivation. And if they lack motivation, they read less. And if they read less, they encounter fewer words, and that ultimately has an impact of a smaller vocabulary. And a smaller vocabulary limits comprehension, and that becomes self-perpetuating. Reading just becomes harder and harder and harder. They read less and less and less. So we can draw this conclusion that the role of reading fluency is comprehension, 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 with a little bit of motivation in there too. So another pause for you, a quick response for your reflection. Do either that bridge or doorway analogy fit your understanding of the role of fluency? Do they expand your thinking a little bit, or do you have a better analogy? I'd love to hear it. And thinking about how we can help all teachers avoid that trap of teaching reading fluency as a rate issue or a speed issue. I hope I've given you some understanding around that. So we're ready for part 2 of the conversation here, assessing reading fluency. And to start that conversation, I want to share with you my thinking around assessment. I've written a couple of books around assessment. I do a lot of talk around assessment, and it has been very helpful for me in my own thinking as a practitioner who works with children to start whenever I think about assessment. I don't think about the test itself or the assessment itself. It's much more helpful if we start with a question. And if we think of the question that we want to answer, and there are lots of questions we have about every student, isn't that true? We would like to know so much about this student, but we have limited time, and sometimes there's no way to answer all of the questions. So we want to be sure that we're looking for useful information that we can use this afternoon or tomorrow to improve our instruction with that student. We want to answer these questions quickly and efficiently because it's not assessments that help us make students skillful readers, it's the teaching. So we want to take as little time as possible. And when we think about what those questions should be in reading, the key questions that I use in my work and the key questions that have been derived from research are really these three questions. The first is, who might need help? And you can think about this in a classroom at the beginning of the year, whether it's virtual or in person. A big question that all teachers should have is, where are my students in terms of the expectations for our end of the year outcomes, and which of these students might need some extra help to accomplish those outcomes? Who might need extra help? Once we have found those students, then the next logical question that researchers say we should be asking is, what help do they need? I'm teaching a third grade classroom. This student is clearly going to need some kind of help. My next question is, what kind of help do they need? So I can, again, target my instruction, focus what I'm going to do. And then we start our instruction. And then our next question is the work working? The student is clearly working really hard. I'm working really hard, but is all this hard work moving us toward the goal, the academic goals that we have set for these students? When we are thinking about that first question, who might need help, we turn to a category of assessments that are called benchmark screening assessments, and we often use the term universal assessments for those students. Every student in the school gets those assessments, so we can determine who might need some extra help. The question, what help do they need, we turn to a very different category of assessments that we might call diagnostic assessments, and these are not administered to every student. Here we differentiate these assessments and administer them only to the students that we have some questions about what their academic needs are. And the third question is the work working, another set of assessments that we often refer to, label as progress monitoring assessments, which are also individually differentiated. For at least two, if not all three of these assessments, in the area of fluency, we often use assessments that I mentioned before, those assessments called oral reading fluency assessments, where we are using a standardized procedure to assess the number of words read correctly per minute, or now we have tools that we can look for our younger students. Before they can read text, we can assess how many letter names or letter sounds they can identify correctly in a minute. That whole set of assessments, all of these assessments come from a body of research called curriculum-based measurement that started back in the 1970s. A group of researchers at the University of Minnesota were looking for some assessments that did not exist back then. They wanted some assessments that, of course, were reliable. Basically, that's the first threshold standard of any assessment. It means you can trust the scores that you're given, that they give valid scores, they have some utility, they have some value to them. And they were also trying to create an assessment that was both quick and easy, that it could be administered by any classroom teacher. It would be very short. You didn't need to be a school psychologist or have a master's degree as a reading specialist to administer those. So they were looking for reliable, valid, quick and easy assessments, and specifically targeting these two questions: who might need help, and is the work working? And for these ORF assessments, now, the process was invented in the 1970s, and nowadays there are many different publishers that have created assessments to use. I know in Georgia, the Acadience assessment is widely used. But all of these assessments are curriculum-based measures, and they follow a particular process of assessing the accuracy and rate of students. And we can use those scores to answer the question about who might need help as a benchmark screening assessment. And I mentioned those are universal assessments. And we can visualize the use of assessment this way, that 3 times a year, beginning, middle, and end, we administer those assessments, some kind of benchmark screener. It could be an ORF assessment. We take that score and compare it to a benchmark that has been established, and we will find that some of our students are, at or above benchmark. Some of our students are slightly below benchmark, and of course, we will always have students who are significantly below benchmark. So what do we do about that? If our students are at or above benchmark, we can assume, based on now close to 40 years of research evidence, that ORF assessment really is quite accurate in determining who is on track. But all we can say about students who are at or above benchmark on an oral reading fluency assessment is that they are likely on track. A 60-second assessment is not definitive. There are reasons why a student might read at or above benchmark and still need some extra help. So we have to always interpret those scores using our professional judgment. But the students who are below benchmark, especially those who are significantly below benchmark, we can be quite certain that they do need some extra assistance. But at this point, we really can't know what that assistance is. So we should always be ready to consider additional assessments, mostly in those diagnostic categories of assessments should be considered. We can use some of those ORF assessments to help us diagnose a student's level in fluency at that individual skill level. We can use those assessments to say, are they just at the very beginning stages of acquiring all the skills that we hope will be mastered eventually to lead to fluent reading? Are they at this stage of reading? Are they here at this stage where they seem to have learned all of the component skills, but they're just beginning the process of being able to read text fluently? Or are they at this level? They are well established as fluent readers for their grade level, because of course students continue to build and tighten and lengthen that rope across the grade level. So we can help to diagnose and answer the question, what help do they need? And those are differentiated assessments. So once we've administered that benchmark screener, if we have some concerns about those students who are at or above benchmark, we certainly can collect additional information. But in most cases, we're just going to continue with the core instruction, the tier 1 instruction. It's usually here with these students who are not quite at benchmark that we consider taking the time to do those diagnostic assessments. And Deb and I have a version of this diagnostic assessment sequence in our book. It doesn't look exactly like this, but the basic idea that we have is that for our youngest students, around kindergarten and first grade, we should start diagnostic assessments with assessments of phonemic awareness, check their high frequency words, check their spelling, and if they are not where we would expect them to be, then we should stop assessing. This flow chart of this diagnostic sequence is really all about saving time, not spending more time than necessary in assessing. So if they're not at benchmark on these foundational components of phonemic awareness, high frequency words, and spelling, stop and start spending your time teaching the letter names, the letter sounds, the phonemic awareness, and certainly because of the complexity of reading, we want to be sure that their language is intact as well. For our older students, yeah, that's older being 7 years old or so, right around second grade, we would switch the direction of this assessment and start by having them read some text out loud, some kind of informal reading inventory where they're reading for more than 1 minute. So we really get a sense of all aspects of their reading fluency, their ability to do error analysis, see what's making them confused, and checking out their fluency in text. And we can start with grade level text. And if it turns out that this student is able to read and understand grade level text, then we can stop our assessment and continue instruction. However, if they're not able to do that, we should continue down this sequence and do further assessments so we can answer that question, what kind of help do they need? When we're diagnosing fluency, we want to, of course, diagnose those components. How is their accuracy on their grade level and at the level they can read, if that's below level? What's their rate? What is their expression? And then if they're not at grade level, why aren't they at grade level? What is their word decoding skills, their text reading and their comprehension skills? We should be thinking about all of that. And so in text reading, we want to check to see their fluency. Is it sufficiently accurate? And we know it should be at least 95%, or for our beginning readers, even higher. It should be at an appropriate rate, at somewhere around the 50th percentile on those Hasbrouck and Tyndall norms when we're looking at text reading, and with suitable expression. And expression is something that needs to be rated more subjectively. So there are rating scales available to us to say your expression is at level 4, you read with expressive interpretation, it sounds like speech, or you're at level 3, 2, or 1, depending, and different rating scales exist for rating expression or prosody. So I want to return for a moment to the sight word aspect too. We talked about that a little bit before, about what sight words are. And we as teachers use sometimes these terms not exactly as accurately perhaps as we should. High frequency words, irregular words, sight words, they are not the same. What we mean by an irregular word are those words in which the letters don't always represent the sounds that are most typically used or not yet learned. So we have words that are irregular temporarily. In early stages of reading, we might not yet have gotten to the CH digraph. And so the students might, if they see the word much in text, they might not be able to read it. That word is irregular for them because they have not yet learned that grapheme, phoneme, correspondence. Or we have irregular words. We have a bunch of them in the English language because of how our language was sort of cobbled together from multiple other languages. Words like of and have and one, O-N-E, that are permanently irregular. They simply don't follow the grapheme, phoneme pattern that we're expected to. High frequency words are those words that appear most commonly in everyday usage, language, spoken language, and in print and in writing. Some of those words are irregular, but most of them are not. And we have many lists that have been compiled by various researchers of these high frequency words. Teachers are familiar with the Dolch list and the Fry list, and there's a Harris-Jacobson list. There are other lists of high frequency words. These are just examples from the Dolch list. So in Dr. Dolch, in looking at texts that might be used with preschool students, came up with this list, and I've highlighted words that are irregular from this list. These are Dolch words from first grade Some, but very few, are irregular words. When we talk about sight words, what we mean by a sight word is any word that the letter sequences have been permanently anchored in our brain as represented by mental orthographic representations. That's one term that researchers use, but it is the letter sequence that is mapped. It's not a picture of the word. It's not an image of the word. We don't store them by sight. We store them as linguistic mental representations of that letter pattern, the orthography. And once they are anchored in there, they are permanently anchored unless we have some kind of brain injury. If we have a brain trauma, we might lose the access to those words. But it was helpful for me to get, I had a sort of an aha moment when someone was talking about sight words being stored differently in our brains. They are not stored as images. When this person was talking about how we do recognize how differently we use images, how differently our brains respond to images. For example, faces. When we meet someone nowadays, so many people are masked, it's a whole different ballgame, but when we're not masked, many of us might see somebody and say, oh, I remember that person, I know that person, but I cannot come up with their name. It's that image that is we're not connecting those two things. Whereas a word, we don't spend time when we're reading going, oh, I remember that word from yesterday. I know I learned it in second grade, but I can't come up with it unless you have aphasia or some brain injury, because we store them completely differently. And Lynn Stone, who is one of the reasons I'm on Twitter, she's on Twitter at LifelongLit. She is a linguist who is in Australia, brilliant, funny, and full of fabulous information about teaching reading. And on Twitter one day, she talked about this, that once a reader has a word in their sight word vocabulary, they cannot suppress its sound and meanings when they come to that word again. So when that sequence has been anchored, in order for that sequence to be anchored, we have to have strong phonemic awareness and phonics, and it helps to know the meaning of the word. All of those things help create sight words, but they are not learned by sight and they are not stored by sight. So thinking about sight words, I wish we had a different name for them. That's where MORs are, but they are different from irregular words and different from those high frequency words. So here's another way to think about it. Those irregular and high frequency, those labels are characteristics of the word. A word either is irregular, temporarily or permanently, or it's not. A word either has been determined to be a high frequency word, or it's not. That's a characteristic of the word, whereas a word is a sight word only uniquely to each individual reader. So a word isn't a sight word. A word is your sight word or my sight word. A physician who's a kidney specialist, this word that was in our passage earlier, which has something to do with some very common kidney disease, would hope a sight word for a physician who deals with kidney disease, but not necessarily. So this isn't a high frequency word. It is not an irregular word, but it may be a sight word for some individual people. So I did create some handouts, and we can talk about at the end how to access those, but in those handouts I did create a checklist for considering diagnostic data. If you've collected some data, it's a way of doing some analysis, so you can use that to plan instruction. So the third use of ORF instruction, ORF assessments, is to help us determine if the work is working when we use them as progress monitoring assessments. And again, these assessments are differentiated. You do them with all students in the same way. In fact, when we're talking about our students who are receiving core instruction, and a lot of us these days are using the term Tier 1 for those students. For those students who are in Tier 1, that's where they're receiving their instruction. For benchmarks, for progress monitoring, really all we have to do are those 3 times a year benchmark screening and just checking their daily performance. If we're meeting with them in small group, do they seem to be keeping up with the core curriculum? Are they seeming to learn and benefit from that core curriculum? We can look at their written work. If you're using a curriculum that has built-in assessments.
Because what seems to have happened is that Davis was once a star.
Pardon me. With our students who are receiving extra instruction in tiers 2 or 3, we can consider using in a different way those ORF assessments. We would do them more frequently, not just beginning and middle and end of the year. We might consider assessing our students once a month or possibly every 2 weeks, maybe for some of our students even once a week. What we do with those scores, that words correct per minute scores, we put it on a graph and we should wait. There's some people who recommend waiting for at least 3 consecutive scores. I think the most current research would suggest that we should wait until we have at least 5 consecutive scores. And for this purposes, the passages can be out of grade level. When we're using ORF assessments like Acadience or Dibbles, for benchmark screening, we always use grade level passages because what we're doing is comparing that student's performance to their grade level peers. Are they at grade level or are they a little below or significantly below? Once we're using ORF for progress monitoring, we can measure, we can assess out of grade level. So for instance, if I was working with a 5th grade student who was reading at about the 3rd grade level, I could do their progress monitoring on 3rd grade level passages. Or because he's a 5th grader, I could also do progress monitoring in 4th grade passages. The scores might not be as high, but remember, we always do assessments to answer a question. And for this 5th grader, what I really want to know is my instruction, he reads right now at about 3rd grade level, but is my instruction moving him up to the 5th grade level? So I might consider assessing him in 4th grade level passages every 2 weeks or once a month or so, and then put those scores on a graph. So I want to show you some CBM, progress monitoring graphs, if you're not familiar with them. These graphs that I'm going to show you were from a study done a few years ago now in Houston with a range of children who are on grade level and above, at grade level, who are struggling with reading. But the red line you see here is what's called an aim line or a goal line for this student. This was the expected growth across weeks for 2nd grade. The black dots and lines are the words correct per minute scores that this student got on a once a week assessment. And what we can see by this is the student is exactly doing expected. This is the kind of thing we would hope to see from a tier 1 student who is benefiting from tier 1 instruction. Just because the dots don't always exactly touch the red line, that's not really relevant. What we see at the end is the student's exactly on level, and we can go, yay, the student, in this situation, we can say the work is working. And here's another student from that same study who at the beginning was right on track, making expected gains, and then woof, mystery. All of a sudden, we don't know why, but this student was exceeding expectations, which is great information for us, because then we are not just going to keep him doing what we're, whatever we're doing is working really well, and we want to raise our expectations and meet this student where they are, up the ante a little bit. This is the kind of curriculum-based a CBM chart that really shows some of the power of asking the question about, is the work working? Because this is a real student who, for the first few weeks of school in this study, was not making any progress at all, or very little progress. So once we had 5 scores, we stopped and collaboratively spent time thinking about what we were doing. Whatever we're doing, it's not working for this student. What are some things we could do differently? And the teachers adjusted their instruction, and after a few weeks, we saw what we want to see for all students is now the student is on track. Now the work is working for this student. And the final graph I'm going to show you is the reality. This is not magic that we're talking about. This is teaching. It's hard stuff. Just because we're monitoring their progress doesn't mean that magic things are going to happen, wonderful things are going to happen. This was the same group of teachers, the same curriculum, the same process was used. After 5 scores, we sat around, talked about what this student was doing. Wasn't working for this student. Let's change what we're doing. Let's figure out something better. But 5 assessments later, 5 weeks later, we're simply not seeing the progress. So this could be the graph of a child who, in fact, has a learning disability, might have dyslexia, might need some specialized intervention in perhaps tier 3. And the earlier we can make that identification, the better. So there's huge reasons to consider progress monitoring and graphing the results for your students, especially those students receiving tier 2 and tier 3 services. To answer that question, is the work working? Once we see graphs like this, a student exceeding expectations or not meeting expectations, we should be asking ourselves these kinds of questions. Are we doing the right instruction for their needs? Have we matched the instruction appropriately to what their needs actually are? Are we using a program and instruction of reasonable quality? We might look at the quality issue. We might need to change our program. Are we using a good program, a high quality program that is matched to our students' needs, but maybe we're not doing it exactly as the program was designed? Maybe that's what we need to take a look at. Are we doing, providing instruction that has sufficient intensity? Is the student actively engaged? Are they have expectations for a lot of responses? Maybe we need to put this student in a smaller group, or even go down to one-on-one tutoring instruction. The frequency and duration. Maybe this student is receiving instruction 2 or 3 days a week for 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe we need to try to meet with the student every day for a little bit more time. All of those things are things that we should be thinking about. And of course, there's an other, because we're dealing with human beings here. Maybe there are other questions we should be asking, and other changes that we should be considering in our instruction. So another handout that I included for you is a checklist, another checklist for considering progress monitoring data, what we should do if we see lack of progress. So I'll take some time at the end for answering questions about assessment, but our last section is around the teaching of reading fluency. How do we develop fluent readers, and how do we develop reading fluency in our students? I love this quote from Roxanne Hudson and her colleagues that talk about the growth of reading fluency in all its multifaceted glory. Here's people who love fluency as much as I do. Reading fluency is an outcome of many different kinds of instruction. And when I think of many different kinds of instruction, in my mind, that takes me right back to Scarborough's rope, with the acknowledgement that in order to get to that tightly woven rope at some point, we need to pay attention to all these different components. We need to be thinking about the instruction of all the components of language comprehension, all the components of word recognition. Some of our students are going to need a lot of instruction in both of these areas. Some students are going to need just minimal instruction, but what is it that they need in terms of the many different kinds of instruction? And then they say, in order to become fluent, that instruction needs to be coupled with large amounts of carefully orchestrated reading practice. And going back to Scarborough's rope, in my mind, that reading practice is what's happening in this part. We've got the component pieces down. Now what we need to happen is in that student's brain is all those pieces coming together, being woven together. If you remember where we started with that image of the complexity of reading, all those component pieces and how they work together, that's what practice will help our students do. Some of this practice with our more struggling students, our English learners, our students with dyslexia or other learning problems, that practice is not going to be very independent. That practice is going to happen with a teacher or a tutor, but they need lots and lots and lots of practice to train their brain to consolidate and coordinate, as Scarborough says. It's the fluent execution and coordination of all those component pieces. So when we're considering fluency instruction, I greatly strongly agree with this quote from Melanie Kuhn and colleague that said, it is critical that we establish instruction that assists our readers in becoming truly fluent readers rather than just fast ones. We can take a moment and think about that little boy reading so quickly in that video, and that's not the outcome we want. We want accurate reading, reasonably accurate reading at an appropriate rate. And now I think we understand appropriate rate is a rate that supports comprehension, not too fast, unless we're just having fun or reading for pleasure, and not too slowly because our brain can't handle that. So our instruction assists our learners in being able to do all of those component pieces, truly fluent readers rather than just fast ones. And in our book, Deb, my co-author, Deb Glazer, actually came up with this. I remember the day. I don't remember if she called me or sent me an email or a text, but she came up with this idea. She said, let's create a framework for teachers, because we're talking about this very complex thing called reading. Reading fluency is only one piece of it. Teachers have so much in their heads. Let's give them a simple way of thinking about reading. And she came up with AAA, which I just love. And if you've been paying attention and you remember, the first A should automatically, of course, be accuracy, because that is, you can say it with me, first, foremost, and forever, the foundation of fluency is accuracy. So if I were going to come to your classroom, how would I would love to do that. I would, and you invited me to watch you teach a fluency lesson. If you were at the kindergarten or early first grade level, I would be looking for accuracy at the letter level, letter sound level, the word level, accuracy. If you were reading with older students and older, like end of first grade, second grade, or above, your fluency lesson, I would want you to demonstrate that you were paying some attention to accuracy. I would want to see some evidence that you were talking about accuracy with your students. I think we underplay the partnership between teachers and students. So talking to the beginning readers or the more established readers about why accuracy is important. You might actually even do a little activity like I did, is take some super hard text, just a little bit, and have them try to read it and see that it doesn't take very many errors before we really cannot understand what we've read. So the importance of accuracy, and include that always in your fluency instruction. So that's the first A. The second A of our AAA mnemonic is automaticity. So we've laid that foundation of accuracy. Now rate comes into it. We want to practice it so many times and with so many repetitions that we instantaneously can pull up the word. We can read effortlessly without thinking about it. And that rate, of course, will increase over time. So we don't expect the same level of automaticity at the beginning of second grade as we do at the end of second grade. We don't expect the same level of automaticity at fifth grade that we do at second grade. So automaticity expectations are going to change across the grades and across the years, but that should be part of all fluency lessons. And that's another thing you can talk to your students about it. Why is reading too fast possibly not a really good idea? And what if we always read this slowly? What's the problem with that? So include examples and practice and rationale in all of your lessons across the grades. And the third A in AAA, we've got accuracy, we've got automaticity. The third A is to access meaning, that the whole purpose of why we teach fluency and include fluency is so our students can access meaning. The purpose of fluency, if you remember, we talked about comprehension, 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 and motivation. So accessing meaning should be part of fluency instruction. If your students are very young and they're just reading at the word level, for at least some of the words, spend some time talking about what that word means. At the phrase level, the sentence level, and the paragraph level, we want to be sure that fluency instruction includes comprehension. It's not something, well, let's do fluency for a while, and now later we'll do comprehension. It's all should be tied together, just like Scarborough did in her rope analogy. When we're talking about which passage to use for fluency instruction, what's the appropriate level of text complexity? We suggested that teachers should consider how difficult the text is, what is the subject matter, what is the purpose for reading, and where the skill level, where the skill of the student is at the level of development of that skill reader. And if you've read the work of David Kilpatrick, he talks about it's important when we are teaching reading that we immediately correct errors. There was a theory for a while that we should, interrupting students to correct errors was maybe problematic because it could get in the way of the flow of their work and their comprehension. But especially at those early stages, when we know about orthographic mapping, we certainly know that words can be incorrectly mapped into the brain, and then later we have to unlearn them. We want to be sure that we're doing the accuracy at all levels, so that correction process is very important. If we have a student who is really struggling with reading fluency, I would suggest, because of the evidence that we have from research, is to consider using a strategy that I label the Read Naturally strategy. And you may be aware that Read Naturally there's a company called Read Naturally that sells products. They have, in my opinion, wonderful tools. And I do think they are wonderful. Many of them, not all of them, are geared to helping students become fluent readers. But I'm really not talking about that company, but the strategy that is embedded in their fluency instruction has strong evidence from research, and something that could be, without buying their materials. I mean, if you have funds and you want a really good fluency intervention, I would strongly look at that. But tonight, I'm not talking about their products. I'm talking about the strategy itself, which I'm going to give you a little overview tonight, but if you want more information, they have quite a good description on their website that's absolutely free. So if our students are struggling with fluency, one of the things we need to do is model accurate reading for them so that they understand what the words should say. We engage, the strategy has the students engage in repeated reading to build that second component of rate, or automaticity. And then ultimately, of course, we should check our students for comprehension. So this is the essence of that strategy, is that you have the students learn the word through modeling and practicing, learn the words for accuracy. Then they do repeated reading to build automaticity. And then in order to move through to the next passage, they need to demonstrate that they understood what they were reading. And the strategy also includes having the students graph their scores, which can be highly motivating for the students. If you are going to consider using this strategy as an intervention strategy, it really is important that you place students appropriately in text of appropriate level of difficulty. And the Read Naturally, on their website, readnaturally.com, you can have access to their placement packet and videos that can show you how to do that. But I find it very interesting when I was first using this strategy with students, that if you follow their placement guidelines, you end up placing students at text that is really very difficult, very challenging. But that actually works because of the level of support and scaffolding to learn the words. There's a real payoff in that. Then this strategy, the placement process, will walk you through how to set a goal, a words correct per minute goal for the students. And once you've done that, you set the goal by taking what their current reading is in words correct per minute and add 30 words to that for grades from about the middle of first grade, where we would start this strategy. That's the earliest we would use that. To about fourth grade, we add 30 words for their goal. For older students, we would take their current baseline performance and add 40 words for that. And then once we've done the placement, we have the students read along to learn the words accurately. They can read along with a CD or a computer or with a skillful reader, so they learn all the words. Then they do the repeated reading, practicing the passage that you've assigned them multiple times, typically for somewhere between 4 or 10. If they have to read more than 10 words to reach the goal that you've set for them, that's probably either the goal's too high or the text is too difficult. And then there's a final step for this strategy where they have to meet with the teacher and read aloud to demonstrate that they can, in fact, reach the goal that has been set for them in terms of words correct per minute. And they have to do that with no more than 3 errors, which helps keep them within that 95% range. They have to use appropriate expression to pass the passage or the story. And then they're responsible to access the meaning of the passage that they read by correctly answering some questions. And then to keep the students motivated, they get to graph their scores, which they do a cold read of the unpracticed passage and graph that first, and that could be done in blue as the cold read. And then after all this practice, they've read along with the they've read along with a teacher or the narrator, and they've done the repeated reading, and they've done the checkout read with the teacher, and they've met their goal. They get to graph that too, and it can be very, very motivating for the students to continue to keep reading the cold read and that hot read or that practicing reading. Okay, well, my goal today was to walk you through this topic near and dear to my heart of reading fluency, and to talk about it in terms of a shared understanding of reading fluency, some ideas of how we should be assessing reading fluency, and how we can use fluency assessments in different ways to answer those questions about who might need some help, what kind of help do they need, and are they making progress? Is the work working? And then a very quick look at some of the ways that we can develop fluency. We need to have good practice, we need to have good solid instruction for all the component pieces, and then practice for our students that is focused on the reasonable accuracy, appropriate rate, and suitable expression that leads, we hope, to comprehension and motivation. So I hope that this has been time well spent for you. I thank you very, very much for your attendance tonight. And I think we do, Cheryl, have a little bit of time for some questions.
Yes, I think we do. And we have
maybe some answers. We'll have questions and maybe some answers too.
Right. So we have one question here from Jacqueline. If a student tends to speak slower than most of their classmates, from my experience, this can also affect their reading speed. Can we still say this student is a fluent reader if they speak and read slower?
I think that's such a wonderful question. And all of us who have been teaching for a long enough time have encountered children at both ends of the speed spectrum. Those children who just move quickly and talk quickly and think quickly, those children, and those who write slowly, they get out of their chair slowly, they hang up their jacket slowly, and speak slowly. So there's a range. We're talking about human beings here. Sometimes it might not be the label that you would put on your students, but yes, they are in fact human beings. And yes, there are children who speak and likely read more slowly than others. And we do always have to use our professional judgment. At the end of the day, the key is understanding. The key is comprehension. If that slow talker is also a slow reader, but she can understand what she's read, that should figure into our thinking about how much work do we need to do to speed her up. However, having said that, I want to accept that fact, and I also have done quite a bit of work around children with dyslexia, and it is well established in the research that that is one of the characteristics of children with dyslexia, is despite lots and lots of hard work and even becoming fairly accurate readers, that at least some of our children with dyslexia never reach the standards of fluency that are set for our traditional students. So we do have to absolutely put our professional judgment into all this. But I also wanted to say that for all those students, even the students with dyslexia or just the slow talkers and slow readers, don't give up on them. There may be some ways with practice over time. What we know is that some of these skills just take an enormous amount of practice time, an enormous amount of investment in our instructional time. So there is a payoff down the road in middle school and high school. If you're a slow reader, it's just going to be that much more time and energy, even if you're a good comprehender. So we want to keep moving those children up to a typical average range if we can, but not making it punitive or punishing, and acknowledging that some of those children might not make it and they still might just be fine.
Okay, thank you. All right, we have another question. What grade level text do you suggest? I know guided reading is heavily cueing based. So what grade level reading do you suggest?
I suggest grade level, and that's a whole nother topic that I would love to talk to people about. For many decades, what has been taught at university and college, what we all were basically taught as teachers, is that what we need to do with our students is find instructional level text, that there is text that's too hard for our students, that's called frustration text. There's text that's easy for our children, that's called independent text. And where we should be teaching all students is instructional level text. Nobody ever studied that or researched that. It just made so much sense. Researchers now have studied whether or not that's true. And there is an emerging research base around the obvious and clearly proven benefits of teaching children in what we have traditionally called frustration level text. That there's some amazing studies, and I'm going to emphasize the word teaching here. This is not text. You don't take hard text and give it to a child and say, go figure out how to read on your own. We don't do that. We're taking children who are fairly well established in reading and giving them a lot of instruction and guidance and reading text that may be 2 or 3 years above what we would consider grade level. And what we find is when we do that with students consistently, it boosts their reading dramatically, way more than giving students just right text or grade level text or instructional level text. But all that is true only for the children who have well-established reading skill. If you think again, I can't pull it up real quickly right now, but that image of Scarborough's rope, we do not want to use challenging, complex text with children until they are almost at that tightly woven rope. Those children who are still, their brains are pulling together all those complex pieces. Challenging text is, for most of those students, going to be detrimental. So we were wrong. Most of us were taught wrong. I taught my students incorrectly, my teacher students. Instructional level text is not what most students should be reading from. They can read that anytime they want to, but what we should be doing our work on for established readers is challenging complex text. For our struggling readers, our vulnerable readers, our emerging readers, it should be more at the independent and what we would consider instructional level text. It's a very good question, and it's a complex answer, but it's something we all need to be thinking about in order to raise the outcomes of our students.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. This question is, what do you suggest we use with students whose first language at home is other than English?
Mm-hmm. I was involved in a discussion today with some folks around that question. Thinking about Scarborough's rope again, we are never going to have a truly fluent reader who comprehends what they've read and are motivated unless we have well-established language. So we have, I don't know if we really have two choices, but one way we could think about it is that we would do all reading instruction in the student's native language. And then as they are acquiring English, we could start switching our instruction to English reading. In most cases, we don't have that option. And when we in fact, talk to parents about why they are sending their children to school, most of those parents say they want students to learn English and become proficient readers and writers in English. So we need to keep in mind, however, that the ultimate outcome of skillful reading is going to require proficiency in language as well as proficiency in the word decoding piece. So we work on both pieces at the same time. When we can connect, if we can connect the original language to English more readily often when we're talking about our children whose first language is Spanish. So connecting the two languages can be very helpful for our students too. But the ultimate goal for most of our students, what their parents want, what we want for them, is proficiency in oral English and in being able to read English. But we have to pay attention to both components at the same time and build all those skills simultaneously as well as we can.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hasbrouck. We actually have a couple of additional questions, but for the sake of time, I want to honor everyone's time. We don't have time to take any more questions, but here's what I will do. Would you mind if I sent you some of the questions and we could get the answers and then email those back to the folks?
We can do that.
That be okay?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So I will do that. I will capture those questions and then we'll email those responses back, because one question was a really good one.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. And I can see the handouts are in the chat for everybody. So if you want to see the PowerPoint as a PDF handout and all those other things, Scarborough's rope and other things are in the chat. So thank you for doing that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your knowledge to help us better understand the critical skill of reading fluency, as defined by the 3 key elements of accuracy, rate, and expression.
Yes.
We now understand how important it is for children first to have those underpinning linguistic processes well established before reading fluency can act as the doorway that leads to comprehension and increased motivation. So thank you so much.
Well done, Cheryl. That's fabulous.
Thank you. I've been sitting here taking notes. So thank you for supporting the Deal Center's goal to bridging research to practice. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
Fantastic. So now we're going to get ready to share a few housekeeping items. And if you would like to take some of your time back, please feel free to bid us farewell. And we'll go ahead and cover some pieces with housekeeping.
Okay, thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, Garrett, please share a few more details about CEU credits and the survey.
Will do, Cheryl. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Are y'all seeing my screen yet?
Not yet.
How about now?
It's coming, yes, we see it now.
All right, once I can figure out how to get rid of this, there we go. All righty. Make sure everything's out of the way for you all. All right, so at the Deal Center, we operate through a model of continuous improvement, which means that we're always striving to do better. A huge part of this process is gathering your feedback from today's event through our survey. We have 2 options for completing our survey. You can either use the QR code that's on the top right hand of your screen, or the link that Katrina will be providing in the chat box. If you need help accessing the QR code, here are the steps. Step 1, open the camera on your smartphone. Step 2, aim the camera at the code to the far right that says scan me. And step 3, tap the banner that appears on your phone. Please answer each question about your experience today thoughtfully and honestly. As part of the survey, you will be asked to provide contact information that is required for CEU credit. I would like to reiterate that CEU credit will not be granted without the completion of this survey. The survey will remain open until the evening of May 13th, so you have exactly 1 week to complete it. Please keep in mind that the Deal Center does not manage the CEU process. So, if you need to contact the Continuing Education Office, we have provided you with their contact information at the bottom of the slide. If you would like to have a confirmation that you completed our survey, please screenshot the closing page before you exit. If you have any questions at all about the survey, please feel free to reach out to me via email or feel free to call the Deal Center main line. Katrina will be putting my phone number and we'll be putting the Deal Center phone number and my email address in the chat box shortly. Thank you all for your efforts tonight and for participating, and we hope you all have a great night.
So we're going to give you all a few minutes to go ahead and get to the link and hopefully be able to use the QR code before we close out. And please let us know if you're having any problems. Just post that information in the chat and we will help you find your way. Thank you all. It's good to see that you were here again, Sadia. Hi, Wendy. It's good to see you.
I think that might be a few events in a row for Sadia. Glad to have you.
I know.
I love you guys. I brought a friend with me this time.
Oh,
fantastic.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Okay, I think.
If I could just share 1 second.
Sure.
Just as this session was starting, I got my acceptance to the PhD in reading at Auburn University.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you guys, though, for stirring this up in me. I really appreciate it.
You are so welcome. Virtual high five. We're so happy for you.
Great job.
So we hope you come to the summit. You'll enjoy the summit as well.
Absolutely. I came to the last one.
Okay, good. All right.
I tell people I'm a fan of the Deal Center.
Fantastic. Spread the word. Okay, Garrett, what do you think?
I think
we're good.
Cheryl.
We're good. All right. Well, everyone, thank you again for a fantastic evening of learning. We're so glad that you were able to spend some time with us. Please look out, be on the lookout for the information about the summit. It will be coming to you soon. And we wish you all a very good night. Best to all.
See you all.
Bye-bye.